Okay, I was just telling Shalini as I was sitting there as Raj, right? Raj and they've finished that really there isn't much left for us to say. And of course, Gideon, you were simply marvelous as far as talking to educationists is concerned, and that's what am told that is here. So I see my brief as trying to raise some thought on what do schools have to do to make sure that children who are passing out are, understood and are ready for college. Okay, so that's the reason why I think so. I have titled it "The Adventure and Romance of Adolescence," really because for schools. Everything that you're trying when the children are very small, they're small and they're more malleable kind of thing. They sort of listen to you, they give you a lot of love. By the time they come to this class 12, you can try giving them a hug and you'll most probably be sent to the police for touching them because that was inappropriate touching and thing. And actually they need the hug, but they don't, want it in a different manner and things like that. So such excitement. I remember long back when talking to Professor Yashpal, and he was actually releasing a book of Krishna Kumar, and he was saying that, a body has cells, and each cell has a dedicated job. But the stem cell can be anything it wants to be. And children are like that. Education is not कि यहाँ दबाया तो वहाँ निकल गया kind of thing. But यहाँ दबाया और कहाँ निकलेगा is the romance and adventure of education. And so, of course, adolescence is the challenge. Now, just to sort of put it into perspective, I was thinking that, okay, we've got to get children ready for the world outside as they leave school. But what is this world that adolescents have to step out? I mean, they were just saying, talking about the CBSE examinations. So today we have these news items that are coming out from class 6, only NCERT books, prepare them for the board exam from class 6. So this is the world that is outside. We also have a lot of talk about alternative truth, and the Time magazine cover was "Is Truth Dead?" I just read an article yesterday which says the post-truth uh, period that we are in. So truth is dead. Okay, honesty is gone. Corruption is rampant. What am I preparing my children for? Is because obviously, as school leaders, you have a plan and you try and say, and when our children come to me for admission in class 1 and I talk to the parents, and I would say, okay, but Arch, we have to look ahead at 12 years. Teachers have to be visionaries. You have to have something that you're, working towards. You're not working for today, you're working for tomorrow. And to work for tomorrow, you have to have a vision that you want. Do you want a better world or you're happy with the world of today? Okay, so that is the question. So obviously, we are optimistic visionaries. We look to make a better world. And we have to work against the forces of the world. So as I was listening to Dave, I was just thinking, courage that we have, is what definitely I would expect my children to have as they step in, but I had come to another. So what is the world that adolescents have to face today, and what are our expectations from the adolescents that are leaving school is linked to each other in that manner. Okay, so this has been said before, but I'm repeating it. So you have the critical thinker, you have the empowered citizen, the sensitive human being, the independent, self-reliant adult. Okay, these are all great terms, not easily achieved. But you chip away. I mean, that's what school is about, that you are chipping away at these things in your head and trying to get to that point that if you are in the alternative facts or the alternative truth period, can I actually discern what is the truth. So you have an information overload, the knowledge explosion, but can he then find out from the information that he's getting what is the truth, and how do I convert that into knowledge? Sensitivity, of course, I find that a very, very important thing that children have. You may be, most intelligent person in the world, but if you're not caring, you're not empathetic, you don't know actually how to use your knowledge, then there's no point. And citizenship. I mean, now, of course, like nationalism, citizenship is also up for understanding and for dissection. But again, this is your vision as an educator, as a leader that you have to have. So I'm going to skip these slides, but that's important. So here we have the world that is there and the adolescents that we have. Okay, so we tried. So I'm not going to talk about the changes. This is all has already been talked. In fact, you got the quotes before me, but I had already put those quotes up, okay? So the brain is under construction. I won't tread into that area with two, professionals. And so I had put all that in, but most importantly, what is normal for the child? So rebellion, defiance, rudeness, mood swings, risk-taking, lying, crossing limits, this is all the norm and the normal for the adolescent. Now, if I understand that, then what do I have to do as a leader to match the previous slide where I said we are looking for critical thinkers, empathetic human beings, the empowered citizen? So just, some things about the adolescents. Of course, the mobile is there. And I take risks, but risk-taking is not the same as risky behavior. Okay? Now, you have this adolescent who is all those things that are there, and then you have parents. When I was trying to explain that, what is the world that they have? Okay, so you have this growing child, and really, the growing child needs a parent or parents who are, there to nurture them through this growth period. You need a school that is understanding and nurturing them, but really, and society. So actually, in earlier times, society, parents, school were all in sync. If I said कि गाली नहीं देना है, तो Papa we would say गाली नहीं देना, and society would also say it. But आजकल तो फिर गाली is like, the better, the even dear old, what is his name? Ranbir and all, the heroes of the time are really good people with galis, So, I mean, my role models are these guys. So, am I surprised that my child doesn't know where he's going? Who is my role model? Which way do I go? So all my supportive factors are not there. So is the school also dropping out of the situation is the problem. So when you say that you have people who need nappy changing in college, I'm not surprised because nobody has actually done their job as they should. So when I talked about courage, if you want to stand up against the CBSE and say that, I'm not going to use NCERT books. I spoke to the chairman when he sort of made this announcement, and I said, but sir, हमारे class 1 में तो किताब ही नहीं है. तो he said, किताब नहीं है? ये कैसे हो सकता है? हाँ? तो मैंने बोला, सर, पार्लियामेंट में डिस्कशन हुआ था कि बैग बहुत भारी है. I thought, let's go the other way. He said, ये सब बातें कमरे में होगा, चाय के ऊपर नहीं हो सकता. आप मेरे कमरे में आके बात कीजिए. So this was a discussion on having books or not having books. I mean, I'm not even going to get into what's going to happen in class 6. It's come to a point where I think it's better to keep your head under and just do what you have to do rather than try and make an argument about things, because then everybody starts. So parents are not in place. Now community. So now I'm going to go into what exactly can be done. Okay, or should be done by a school. So we have to get our parents to connect. It's very, very important. So now I'm just telling you what schools can do, what leaders can do. We have to work with our parents. And, we say we'll work with the kid, but if the parent is not on the same page, it's very difficult. So it's very, very important from day one, from class 1 onwards, to get the parents onto the same page, to get a good relationship going with the parent so that you can nurture the child. That's the reason, okay? And we believe very strongly in advocacy and activism. We send our children out for dharnas and things like that, only for them to see what is possible for you and to get you to think. Okay, so if Aruna Roy and all are standing up for the pension parishad or for food security bill, well, go and stand out there, give water to people who are there at Jantar Mantar, and then try to understand the whole issue. So in that manner, they start to question what is being offered by the government. So this is not to say that the government is always wrong, but you have to learn to question. You have to. So the law and police, they have to work with the police. So Project Citizen is, I'm naming certain things because it's interesting how. So part of Project Citizen, a particular project that children do, is to pick up an issue, like suppose the road outside the school is not in a very good condition. So who is responsible for getting that road proper? So okay, the local MLA is responsible. Then will you write to the local MLA to set up a meeting and go and talk to him? Will you get that road done in a manner that is acceptable? Okay, how do you problem solve? How do you resolve issues? Okay, the MLA doesn't listen to you and he tells you to get out. Then what do you do? So you actually work out a problem. In that manner, we are building those skills that I had said earlier about critical thinker, empowered citizen, empathetic human being, those things. So you have to give opportunities, you widen the community, and of course, role models. Now you will call, Dave has called some people to speak today. People come to speak in the school. Obviously, the leader has to decide who will come to speak to the school, to the students, to the adolescents, to the little ones. So, you have a choice. You can call, if you want, the Chief Minister of UP to speak if you want. Or, you can call what should I say, Harsh Mandar, if you want. You can call Harsh Mandar to speak, right? So it's your choice who you want to speak, and obviously the people you call gives a message to the children. So the unspoken messages are actually the ones that stick more than the ones that you actually speak, okay? So really what is the opportunities? So ultimately, if you understand society, if you understand how parents are, if you understand the adolescent, then what does the school do? I think a good school gives you opportunities for growth. Now, that's where your curriculum starts to come in, okay? So that's where courage starts to come in. Do you stand up? What are the movies you show them in your, movie analysis period, for instance? So, Scent of a Woman. Now you can say Scent of a Woman is, there's too much of, sexuality perhaps in it. But there's also certain thoughts that come up and that can be discussed with the child. To Serve with Love is very common. So we have something called House Day in the school. This is a version of Annual Day. So what happens in House Day? We have 4 houses, but each house is we give an overarching team, like say, okay, suppose I take, this year we had done Shakespeare, and they had to pick up any theme from Shakespeare, then write a play using that theme. Okay, so when it was Romeo and Juliet, they actually wrote a play in which a homosexual couple wanted to get married. And then they had to set it to a Nautanki style and present it in the Nautanki style with music. When they have to do this, so they have to write the script, set out the music, write the lyrics, then they have to do funding. So how much will you get money? Based on that, you have to present a budget, okay? Based on your budget, you can raise a certain amount of money. The school will give you a certain amount of money. Then you make an invitation card. Then you this thing. Then you train your children. You can take people from outside based on your budget. So basically what I'm saying, from A to Z, and then of course the house captain is training. And then they say, ma'am, these little ones don't listen. How do you get them to listen? How do you demarcate your responsibilities? How do you allocate, not be, boss man all the time? Through these opportunities, and this is just one example I'm giving, but through opportunities and the curriculum that the school gives, the child grows. Okay? And so, in short, we need to work together and get somewhere. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Koshi. Uh, you know, it's very rarely that a head of school or an ex-head of school can find a kindred soul. And I'm so glad you pointed this out. And it brings me to a point which I've always felt, that a good school leader has limitless opportunities to do the kind of things that Dr. Koshi was talking about. The problem today in this country is, are we allowed to be school leaders, or have we been relegated to managers? You know, this is what is happening with the sort of new schools that are coming up, with all kinds of people investing in schools as a quick business. Heads have been reduced to managers. They're there to get bums on seats. And any imagination beyond that is, and more often than not, unacceptable. You and I are lucky that we have people above us who have the vision to encourage us to do the things that we do. But I'm sorry that, you know, out there, I come across heads almost on a daily basis who say, sorry, I mean, I don't even want to go there. Not even my boss's wife comes into school every day and she says, you know, this is what is to be done and this is what is to be done. So, you know, this is a problem we have. So that's another, subject for discussion. But now I won't hold up the proceedings anymore. I request Dr. Advani to come in.
It's interesting to come up after so many very interesting, varied speeches and try and recalibrate what you had thought about talking about. I'm really going to emphasize picking up from some of the ideas that have been talked about, to think about the social impact, not the impact on individuals only, but the social impact of some of the decisions we make, some of our education processes, and to think about the challenge of adolescence. Because, as already has been mentioned by Dev, we hold a real trust. And I think that sometimes you know that it's a cliche, but for anybody who's an educator, it really does get you going every morning. It is a genuine and profound belief. So thinking about the challenge of adolescence is difficult because it is so broad. Which adolescent are we talking about? There are certainly challenges, but is this a challenge for an adolescent from Gorakhpur or from Delhi? And as we look at preparing them for university, which university are we talking about? Is it Gorakhpur University? Is it Jindal? Is it Delhi University? Each of these really has a different answer. Some generalizations are true. Every adolescent comes to university with a sack full of dreams, with a desire to reinvent themselves, with a thought process that leaves behind that board exam that they have sweated over and that has sometimes dominated their minds for 8, 9 years of their school life. Universities, and with no offense to our present company, often don't meet these hopes. We're all aware of adolescent depression. Between 10 and 20% of adolescents suffer from depression. We see aggression, we see stress. So what is it that we at universities really need to do? What is it that we in schools have to prepare for? And is the challenge of adolescence less about the adolescent herself or himself and more about the world that they enter and the world that we create for them? So let me start with looking at something that's at the heart of what all educators focus on, and that is the whole area of knowledge. The biggest problem that we all struggle with is honestly boredom. Young people, as they go through school, are virtuous about the work that they have to do. But a lot of the time, what they go through in classrooms is done out of a sense of virtue rather than out of excitement. So we tell them about the need to be diligent, to work hard, but we don't tell them enough about the breathless excitement of finding a new idea or looking at something from multiple perspectives or looking deeper. And in fact, what we do is we create adolescents who have become increasingly dismissive of deep ideas and of deep thinking. There's a tendency to, look at complex ideas and think that बहुत serious हो गए हो यार, ये क्या हो रहा है? Or even to the teacher, ये syllabus में है कि नहीं है, exam में आएगा कि नहीं आएगा. That becomes the definer of what knowledge is about. And of course, exam systems, we know, are central to the problem. And, I have to pick up on what has already been said by the Vice Chancellor. It is rare to have a platform that is common between school and universities. And so I want to reiterate what has been said earlier, which is that university admission systems have to change. One is that, of course, CBSE and those boards should be changing. But even while we raise our voices on them, there is a capacity for university admission systems to change. There is too often a divide between the student who gets good marks and the student who does interesting things. And they're not the same student too much of the time. It seems to be difficult to do both in our system. But if more universities required a broader, more inclusive profile of the student as part of their admission process, schools would definitely respond. They would then take these things more seriously. A few schools do it, but far too many. And as matters stand, the marks-based university system that we have actually takes choice, it takes empowerment away from students. We tell them what they have to learn, meaning, of course, the board exams, the boards tell us and we tell them what has to be learned. This unforgiving aspect of the cutoff mark in order to go to the university of choice always becomes the line that are given to us to end all arguments about a broader education. But in fact, this approach to education, of knowledge as being something for marks, has very major social consequences for us as a community, as a nation. So we've moved, for instance, towards an idea of knowledge as useful only if it delivers financial reward. Entrance to the good university, eligibility for the better job. But even for the best students, this is all about the individual. Even those who get the marks, it's all about the individual, your own personal success, very little about social good. There's this wonderful book which I would recommend to anybody who's not read it, by Michael Sandel, the philosopher, What Money Can't Buy. And he says that we are moving from a market economy to a market society. A society in which all sorts of areas are now measured by and valuated in financial terms. Sandel's book is subtitled The Moral Limits of Markets. And he sees a society in which almost everything is up for sale, a mindset in which everything has a notional monetary value. So this, of course, raises moral questions for us, and societies are grappling with this. How do we feel, for instance, about universities auctioning admission to university? Or about the schools in New Jersey which incentivize 7-year-olds to read by giving them monetary payouts? In a world governed by financial valuation, think of the challenges to adolescents who move to higher education. They're already operating. In India, we know, as in much of the world, we live in a society of consumption. But the system of education has taught them that learning equals marks, equals a good university, equals jobs. There's a direct line transfer from there. They're not really familiar with the idea, because we don't introduce it to them very much, that complex ideas equals deep understanding, equals learning. And that learning should come later as the raison d'etre of education. To read, to research, to write term papers, to think deeply poses an unaccustomed challenge to them. There's a search for the defined lines of a syllabus which will be examined when they come to university. There's the idea of general reading, which seems absolutely foreign. They've not seen the need for it so far, and they need time and they need guidance in adjusting to these demands in higher education. And by way of counterpoint, I will share that one of the delights of the curriculum that I work with, the IB, is that it does require independent thought based on a student's own interest at the school level. I was supervising a student they have to do a research paper, an extended essay, and the one that she chose to do was in English literature, and it was on the idea of non-binary gender in science fiction. There's another student, for instance, whose research question is what levels of data compression in music files is acceptable to the human ear. Now, these are topics that children in grade 11 and 12 do. And when they pick these topics in their subject, in economics or in English or in physics or whatever it is, it gives space for individual passion and gives genuine meaning to the idea of knowledge. In fact, in some ways, the challenge of adolescence is that they are insufficiently challenged. At this stage of life, they're both wary and open to engagements with the world. And very often, as they've pointed out, schools are very enclosed, protected worlds. They come from the same economic backgrounds, and day schools, they tend to come from the same region. And then they get to this university, which is so much more varied, economically by class, but also by belief system. What happens to their own identity? One which they're not even conscious sometimes till they get there that they're carrying. What happens to issues of caste or gender or sexual orientation? There's, of course, a question of individual anxiety, but it goes beyond that. Today, we're negotiating a complex variety of identities, which are often hidden or suppressed in schools. And it's important to talk about this because look at what is happening in universities today. In Hyderabad, where Rohit Vemula's suicide set the university on fire, or in JNU, where the new admissions policy or calls for Azadi grabs headlines, or at Ramjas College in Delhi University, where there has been an uproar over the disruption of a seminar. Suddenly, every 19-year-old has a very strong view on national identity, on their religious identity, or even about soldiers in the Indian Army. In fact, when one listens to young people, and you listen to them on these television interviews that have followed with the news, you find so much passion, so much involvement and commitment and genuine caring for whatever it is that their belief system is, that you begin to think about what is it that we're doing to engage them, to shape them in this. These are society's signs of being in ferment, of young people engaging in social issues with a different urgency and with a new urgency. So what are we doing to lay the groundwork? Young people have strong political opinions, but they're often not thought out. They're keen on an engagement with the world, but their ideas are really not fully formed, isn't it, at this age? There's a groping. It is shaped so much by what their friends are saying, what their families are saying. So how do we get them to understand that the world that they know is constructed? It's not a given. It's constructed by our gender, by our family value systems, by our religion, by media. In our 21st century, we talk about post-truth, we talk about increasingly and unfortunately about actual manipulation of truth. So what's the role of schools in all of this? By way of example, let me give you some of the things that we do. And Annie has talked about very wonderfully, so I won't go into that, the social and community engagements and outreaches. What I'll talk about instead is about focusing on getting them to think inwardly. So we do the external things, but what we get them to think about in terms of social construction is also an important part of what schools should do. So for instance, we've had events like a focus on masculinity. What does it mean to be a man in the world today? What is the pressure on males to make them into men? Who shapes this meaning? What is the role of social media and pressure? And young people at 13 and 14 upwards have looked at this through drama, through writing their own play scripts, through debating, through watching films, through listening to speakers who come in and talk about how gender is a construction. It is not the same as sex. Or on, recently there was a month-long study by students from grade 4 to grade 11 on the ways in which we make some groups into the other or strangers by focusing on certain aspects, religion or color, or by using stereotype. Black people are violent, Asians are manipulative, women like to gossip. And by learning about different groups, whether it is Kashmiri Pandits or Muslims in India today, or forced migration to the cities because of development, or the fate of Syrian refugees, our children began to think about the individual cost of this human process of othering. So finally, I'm going to end with focusing on the importance of opening up opportunities for different types of action as part of our curriculum. So in schools and universities, I think those of us who are thinking institutions look to doing it. We look at giving opportunities. But to make it really embedded, you have to look at ways of embedding it into the program itself. You have to give them structures of social entrepreneurship for incubating ideas and solutions, which are some of the most effective means eventually of meeting the challenges of adolescence. So the inculcation of social entrepreneurship mindset means creating a capacity for risk-taking, for invention, for recognizing that failure is encouraged and innovative leadership is promoted. This is what empowers, draws young people to contribute to their society, to their world in different ways. And of course, that's what each one of us as educators dreams about. Thank you.
Dr. Advani, you know, मैं आदत से लाचार हूँ, and having been a principal for about 27 years, it's very easy to grab the mic and then, take off, because it's such an interesting discussion and you don't want to let off where someone else is, stopped, and you want to carry it on. But I cannot usurp the right of the panelists. I will, however, briefly talk about one or two things. One is, stemming from what Dr. Advani said. One is this business, in my opinion, humble opinion, this career counseling in schools must stop. School is not the place to decide your career. I'm sorry. We start, as someone, Raj said, from class 6, they're being put into IIT. I mean, for God's sake, let them learn, let them enjoy the learning process, which is what all the panelists are talking about, the excitement, the joy of discovery, the ability to collect, to read math and music and to find the connections between the two, but we box them in and then we start this career counseling right from class 7 or 8. Then the other thing that Dr. Advani talked about was this whole business of looking at ourselves and developing ourselves. Now, unfortunately, That is a luxury available to only well-to-do schools like ours. You know, if you deal with 90% of the schools, the parent comes and says, "ये क्या बकवास सिखा रहे हो मेरे बच्चे को? पढ़ाई कराओ." Have I sent him here to learn about all this? कि हिंजड़ों का क्या हक होता है? ये पढ़ाने भेजा है. I had a parent telling me, आप मेरे बच्चों को सिखा रहे हो कि हिंजड़े कितने अच्छे होते हैं और उनको क्या मिलना चाहिए समाज से. आप इम्तिहान के लिए तैयार करिए, ये वक्त मेरे पैसे मत बर्बाद करिए. उसको रिजल्ट वो सब लिखने से उसको रिजल्ट नहीं मिलेगा, 90% नहीं मिलेंगे. So that is the grim truth of the system. That is the grim truth of the system. So there are constraints there, you know, and these are issues we grapple with every day. But, you know, I think we've just got to keep fighting, as she said, as all of them have said. We've just got to hang in there and fight and fight and fight. Because as I keep saying, if the teacher gives up, it's like the soldier in Kargil giving up and saying, "मैं तो नहीं लड़ता अब, we are finished." The teacher is our last line of defense, and we have to keep fighting. So with that thought, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Shonali Nag for her final words on the subject.
As some of you might have guessed, I've stepped in at the last moment to be a speaker. And as part of a preparation for this talk, what I did was to go back to my notes when I've met young people. I've been running a clinic in Bangalore for several years now, and I have extensive notes of what young people have spoken about as their crisis and their coping. And I bring some of those voices into my presentation today in this topic called Understanding and Responding to the Challenges of Adolescence. A lot of individual differences in how adolescence is experienced, and I've tried to capture it in the idiom of adolescence, the emoticons that seem to rule their lives and have taken over our lives as well. So there are some who are cocky, there are some who are withdrawn, there are some who are angry, there are some who are confused. So you have the whole gamut of emotions that you experience throughout your phase of adolescence, and some adolescents seem to experience some emotions much, much more often than others. So you have young people who go through adolescence completely smoothly, well-intentioned, with well-being always on their side. And there are other adolescents who seem to attract anger, they seem to attract depression, they seem to attract anxiety, they seem to attract discipline, they seem to attract a lot of anger against them. So there are individual differences. So the first point to be made is that no two adolescents are the same. And so no two interventions will work equally well with all adolescents. And then I'd like to actually focus on what I've learned from adolescents who've had difficulties. These are the ones who've actually gone through their phase between the age of 13 and 23, struggling to make sense of their lives. They've gone through it perhaps because they've had problems that were their own or problems that were thrust upon them. And what do we understand about adolescence and the experience of adolescence from their words? And here are some of what I've tried to capture from my notes. The first one, all you do in school is education. Everything else is secondary. And you can't really do well in that. If you do not do well in that, then, it becomes quite awkward. Many adolescents are given to hyperbole, but many of them are given to being understated. So when they say it's awkward, they mean it's a crisis for some of them. Another snippet from another child. My challenge is doing things fast and quickly. Everyone wants things quickly today, and so I have to learn to do things well and as perfect as possible, but quickly. So amongst all the different things that we are saying we need to bring into our discussion, I think one of the things we definitely need to bring into our discussion is, can we slow down the pace? Can we slow down our expectations of results of what we do with young people and what we see should come out of what we do. And the last one, which has to do with how they feel about being thrust into relationships. I don't go out and talk to people. I just can't. I'm trying to work on that. And now these are all actually, for me, voices of people who understand their situation, who are quite articulate about their situation, and who are actually actively seeking their own solutions. They don't need you and me all the time. It's not that we are here to be the saviors of the next generation of adolescents. They're doing it themselves anyway. And then some of what I've heard in terms of what they're trying to do. I think my only challenge would be I have to be a lot more hardworking than others. I find that a challenge. A lot more time I need to work, and I need to do a lot more things with effort, put in actual effort. I'd like to underline the word effort. It doesn't seem to be a word they don't understand. They do understand effort. And I'd like to highlight the word actually. That there's a twist over there. Then they are basically telling you there are times when I want you to think I'm putting an effort, but I'm actually not putting in an effort. And there are times when I am putting an effort, whether you're looking or not. So there is deep thought here, there is deep experience here, there is a deep authenticity of experience of adolescence here. And I'd like to bring that back into the center stage when you're talking of the transition years. The transition years is about coping. The transition years is about someone who's trying to do the best they can to live with themselves first. Of course, there's the world outside. And these are some of the things that I've just thought I'll bring back to you from my notes. So what I did find from a lot of what I was reading and from what I've been writing about the transition years is that many of them seem to have a philosophical acceptance of their situation. Many of them seem to, and these are really the ones who have difficulties. And sometimes I think the adolescent who's gone through difficulties is the lucky one, because they've gone and been burnt through it and come out through it with the formation for adulthood. The ones who've not had those difficulties will face it at some point, and they won't have that historical resilience that they could have picked up on. And what I see from many of these with difficulties is a forbearance, a sense of grace and a sense of experiencing their situation, because as they've pointed out, often it's an extremely isolating situation to be in as an adolescent. I see grace in a lot of adolescents, even the ones who have been brought to me because they broke the rules, even the ones who've been brought to me because they've been given names like hyperactive, or they've been given names like, does he have an antisocial behavior? So the ones who you might have thought had a conduct disorder. So I'm talking of the entire spectrum. I see grace. I often see stoicism. Ma'am, whatever you say, I have to go through it. My teacher won't understand my situation. So I see a lot of stoicism in adolescents. But I also think one of the things I've often had to battle with in my counseling sessions is passivity, which is not so far away from forbearance, where you basically give up. You give up against an adult nexus, which basically says you have to fit in. You give up against an examination system, which basically says, keep aside your photography for now, just study. You give up against a sporting career because you realize that there is a reservation system, it's not about meritocracy. So you keep giving up. So there could be forbearance, but then you could quickly slip into passivity. And then the cycle of passivity into adulthood makes an adult who's not much good for society, really. Amongst the different kinds of difficulties I've worked with mainly, I would like to focus on school underachievement, those who are in school and underachieving. And here I would like to say that underachievement is one of the highest incidents of difficulties any child guidance clinic anywhere in the world will see, but particularly in India. You don't do well, you get sent off to a counselor. But what's important is what is not doing well. That seems to be defined differently in different contexts. It is entirely defined by who says you're not doing well, who decides the standard of wellness, who decides what is difficulty, and there are several schools where 92% is not doing well. There are other schools where 73% and you're actually the star of the class. So what is not doing well has to be reviewed. What's the manifestation of this difficulty? If it's a clinical syndrome, you would see, yes, the primary manifestation of the difficulty in an attention deficit disorder is attention. In an autism spectrum disorder, it's about social relationships. In an emotional disorder, it's about angst and depression. But there are all the secondary difficulties, and these secondary difficulties often are the bigger burden for the adolescent than the primary difficulty. So often when I'm working with dyslexics, what I'm told is, ma'am, I can actually deal with my dyslexia. What I can't deal with is pity. What I can't deal with is incomprehension. And I also hear this from very gifted young people who basically say, ma'am, I know I have a problem of boredom. I'm just bored with the school curriculum. But if I'm just left to solve my problem, what I would do is I would take on an online accelerated course. I will do my school course and I'll do my accelerated course. But on the other hand, what the teacher would say is, you're just being too big for your boots. So there is always this tug, as Gideon spoke about, and that tug is often played out into all kinds of secondary difficulties for the adolescent. And I want to just clarify that my presentation is not for the ones who have biomedical definitions. I'm not talking of the ones who attract these definitions of attention deficit and all of that. I'm talking about the ones who have no biomedical definitions that will explain their difficulties. These are the ones who you and I have let down, and that's why they're having their difficulties. And when we look at all of these young people who are struggling, and there are a huge number of adolescents struggling, what are the issues that come up? One is, of course, the fact that many of them have many risk factors, like a teacher of math who doesn't believe anything else is important other than math. So the teacher is a nightmare in the staff room, but the teacher is a nightmare in the child's life. You don't do well in math, you're labeled as poor. You're labeled as poor intellectually. So one risk factor I think one of the biggest risk factor a child can have is a bad math teacher. You just destroy the child for life. Another big risk factor a child could have is a school that is arrogant in what it thinks it can do, where you infringe into homes, tell parents to change around to fit into schools. And a lot of homes are now having to actually restructure what they do to just fit into what schools think should be done. While on one hand, I see that as dialogue and everybody coming together for a common tune of child rearing, at another level, I think we are destroying diversity. Schools should allow homes to have their independence and do things. So there are those kind of risk factors. Then there are protective factors. The teacher who's not very good in class teaching but is wonderful, is always usually available for a chat afterwards in the corridor. That teacher typically is your protective factor. So we need to actually see who is protecting the child and who is the risk one to the child. Because often the issue of marks can decide that the risk factor is the one who's not getting you the marks. And I would also like to highlight that one of the risk factors is having well-being. There are children who don't do well but are happy. Can we leave them like that? Or should we underline it? And then there are children who do well and are still unhappy. I have a little 7-year-old who lives with us, and one day she came and she said, Akka, my cycle is not working. So I said, okay, let's try and figure it out. I said, oh, Akka, you can't do it. We need to wait for Appa to come, her father to come. I said, well, he's busy. Let me try and come and help you. So we went and we both tried to sort out the cycle, and miraculously, thank God, it started working. The chain had come off. She looks at me, and she's all of 6 actually, not yet 7, 6. And she says, Akka, even girls can do this. Where have these notions come from? Where have these notions of I can, I can't? and I'm good, I'm not good, I shouldn't try and do some things come from. And all of these quite entrenched by adolescence. And the sense of well-being coming from saying that I want to do something which others are saying I shouldn't do. So what's our real main challenge? I mean, we're talking of challenges of adolescent, and I'm saying that adolescents are taking on their challenges except where passivity has come in. What are the things that schools and universities can do? Many of the universities I find are looking at, can they take their exam? So it is interpreted as, are they ready for higher education, as are they ready for the academic demands of higher education? The other word which I have slowly but definitely grown to hate is soft skills. I have pretty hard on soft skills. I don't understand that. And anyway, this soft skills is really meant to be where you turn every individual who's in front of you into a speaker, assertive, socially attractive. But remember individual differences. They will stay even in the party, in the room. There will be some who will be awkward. Can we leave them to be awkward? There will be some who will be brusque. There will be some who will be rough. There will be some who will be blunt. Thank God for them, because otherwise we'd have clones. So let's rethink our soft skills curriculum and check whether it has anything to do with keeping them realizing their potential, and is it to do with the corporate smooth speaker that a lot of people are asking for. So that's another word that I don't like. And the last is, can we think of them becoming reflective? I think both of the speakers before me, and Gideon and Dev and Dr. Rajkumar, did want a reflective young person making the transition. And reflection, I think, is something that turns out to be particularly the toughest thing to share and role model and then see playing out. Are we reflective? How do we articulate our own reflections? And how do we pass it on to the next generation to be reflective? And that brings me to all the people who can do all of this, which is the home, the community, and the institutions around the child. And here I think, particularly for many of the school children that you might be meeting, and I tend to meet mainly children in poverty, but maybe if you're looking at the more privileged sector, I find a lot of alpha parents, mothers and fathers constantly advocating for their child to have the best, unleashing their network of contacts so their child gets a massively wonderful CV. And when I sit on an admissions committee in Oxford and look at these CVs, I'd say, this is doctored. This doesn't make sense. The child hasn't learned to reflect on these experiences. This has been one summer camp to another, one project to another. Where is the reflection? So one of the issues is having hyper advocacy within the home for the child. And I'll come to why that's an issue. The other is an issue of communities which are either very closed or very networked but ethnocentric. What does that do for adolescents? And the third is institutions. I mean, to have an institution which is reflective, like the two speakers before us, is a rarity. Most institutions are not reflective. They don't have a sense and a space for reflection. So to just think for ourselves, what do our institutions as schools and universities arrange for young people by way of access to opportunities, by way of access to debate and discussions? What are we communicating by what we arrange? Are we communicating that dissent is all right? Are we communicating that this is the fashion of the week and we should all subscribe to it? And of course, we need to check, what do we know? Often, those of us who arrange things for adolescents know much less about new things than the adolescent. So we tend to actually arrange things which are just 3 steps behind, if not the 1935 kind of, what was it, Crimean War? Yeah? Yeah. The reason I think this is all important is because we are hoping that through reflection and through whatever opportunities we are giving, we are allowing adolescents to have self-determination. Over and over again, what we are coming up with in the crisis of the young adult, particularly in Asian countries, is the quality of purpose. a quality of purpose that's driven by consumerism, or that's driven by here and now, or that's driven by an absence of any kind of visionary or missionary zeal. So the social emotional aspects really then come up as the most important preparation for the transition. And I'd like to then say, what are the things I've learned from the successful transitions of adolescents who've had difficult times? Many of them have had the courage to explore less popular career options. And what I'm proposing here is that their liberal attitude to career choice emerged from the experience of a sharp contrast of their difficulty and a very circumscribed area of their awareness of their strength. Let me unpack that. When an adolescent has had failure and has difficulty, I find they grow up with greater grace, because they are then able to actually reflect on where are their strengths and how can they harness their strengths. When an adolescent has had no difficulties, I find cockiness, I find a swagger into life, and that very often translates into a non-preparation for risk, a non-preparation for disaster. So if you're looking at learning from adolescents who have made a success of their crisis, one of the things we can learn from them is that they stopped, reflected, picked on their strengths, learned to circumvent their difficulties and move ahead. Which also then means when you're doing counseling to adolescents, stop preaching, because that's not what they're looking for. The idea of bringing role models would work much better. I find that they've shown resilience, they've shown perseverance, they've managed to extract well-being out of crisis, and they've shown a very skilled way of sidestepping their difficulties. And the last point that I want to make is that if you're working with privileged families, that is those who are in the upper socioeconomic status, I think one of your biggest challenges is to tell the families to back off and let the child determine their future, and not be the ones who constantly open doors for the child. In that respect, the lower socioeconomic child is at a tremendous advantage. Parents are not there to open their doors, they are learning constantly to self-determine. So the biggest tragedy of richness, or richy rich, is the fact that you don't become yourself. And your parent is constantly calling up the next person to sort out your life. A few other points, and this is my last slide. Recognize that whatever age you have a young person coming to you, whether it is in the third year of university or in standard 12 or in class 5, interventions will always work. So the saying that it is far too late, I think, is simply a cop-out. It's never too late. Any of these are catch-up programs, and all of these catch-up programs will make a difference. They may be uneven across the kinds of areas you need to intervene, but they'll all make a difference. Try and see if you can create space for reflection. And by that, I really mean slowing down things. Can you have 2 periods and then say 1 period is just to think about it? Can you have 1 week of some theme and then say the next week is to continue thinking about that theme? So basically slowing down things. When I see school calendars today and university calendars, I don't see the space for thought. And just to say that if you have too many opportunities, you will smother reflection. So some of the best schools have too much. So then they stop being the best school. So can you slow things down? And the most important is, if you want to be an advocate for a child, particularly a child who needs the advocacy, can you do it in a way where it is not undermining self-determination? So that they can also be their own advocate and not always need you to be their advocate. So let there be some adolescents in the room. Thank you.
Ali. Yeah, 15 minutes. We have a 15-minute question period, but before I just begin that, I just want to touch on one point. She talked about the community institution matrix. And if I may put on my university hat, and I'm dealing with adolescents in university, one of the conflict areas seems to be the role of parents. You see, every time we have a problem, and we have a problem with a student or whatever, behavior or whatever, and we say that we are going to inform the parents, they're up in arms. They say, we are the stakeholders. You know, we are adults, young adults. Why the hell must you deal with our parents? But when the parent comes along, they say, we pay the fees. You jolly well communicate with us. You know, we had like any other university, we have our share of problems, and there were some problems last semester. And the parents came and said, मेरे को बुलाते, मैं आके 2 थप्पड़ मार के ठीक कर देता. ये disciplinary committee क्या है? You know, so there is that conflict. So I just wonder, we always have PTAs in school. I don't know why we shouldn't have them in university also, possibly, you know. And maybe I'm seeing the need, I'm really seeing the need in my role today of communicating with parents even at university. And we must also keep in mind, and I have much more erudite people than me to tell me about this, but I think by far and large, the Indian child matures much later than the Western counterpart. You know, because of the way we are brought up, you know, we baby talk to them till they're about 10. And if you see all our TV ads, the kids who speak, they're so unnatural, you know, they go gang, 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 gang. I mean, and normally do people speak like that? Some kids sleep with their parents till they're 10, you know, and then they have servants in the house to do everything for them. So the maturity process is put back. You know, the mental and emotional maturity that you spoke of is really postponed in our case. So when they enter university, they're still basically kids, you know, and yet they have all the trappings of adulthood and wanting to, you know, chafing at the bit to be set free. But I think there is a huge case, and unfortunately the Vice Chancellor decided to take a break at this stage, otherwise this message really was for him, that, you know, there may be a case for a PTA in a university of a different kind. You could tweak it and you know, bring in parents and have a more meaningful, because there's a huge conflict area there. Just, in fact, night before last, I think it was, we had about 100 students outside the registrar's office demonstrating on this one issue, saying the university talks to our parents, they don't talk to us. We are the guy, we took admission. Now I asked them, yeah, who's paying the fees? That the Maa-Baap is paying, but, you know, supposing they stop paying tomorrow, where will you go? But, you know, those are issues that need to be talked to and dialogue, and so there is a case for that. Now we can open up for questions. Yes, sir. There's a mic coming to you. Just if you would be kind enough to say to who the question is addressed.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Anand Vardhan. A question actually I heard from also question maybe in common, because it is around adolescence basically. 3 speakers there talked on adolescence, and also he has on science also. So in my view, what I have heard and understand, and I found there is something missing which we have not discussed and should be taken. I think at present students, they do not know about their problem. We teacher or guardian, we are understanding, thinking and discussing, but that very time when we were adolescents, we are knowing about ourselves that we are adolescent and what are there, what are happening. We read a story of Rabindranath Tagore, Homecoming. I think most of people that very time, maybe syllabus that very time, Homecoming. That is for 14-year student. And how it is happening and Homecoming, if a student of this present time, they can learn at least Homecoming in the syllabus. I do not know, syllabus should be like that, so they can understand about themselves. Then they can. And Madam Shalini, very nicely she has concluded that students at present, they are not having a space to think. And secondly, self-determination. And all the speakers, they have given thought, but I think panelists may decide or say or conclude or suggest that a student should know about themselves. And that should be in curriculum, should be there somewhere.
So what is
So,
your question? That is the
Question is, sir, कि students, they are knowing about themselves or not? Because adolescent, 14-year students, what is the, you can understand, if they are asking good question and telling it is a good one, then guardian tell, oh, you are talking like old. If it is doing wrong, he is doing wrong, oh, you are silly, you are doing very, you are like that. So this type of confusion in their mind, so they should understand it is happening naturally. So
I
they
think,
should understand.
You know, you yourself have found your own answer.
I
to your
answer.
question.
That's why. Is this
No,
suggestion
I'm saying
missing?
you have found an answer to your own question.
No, answer
When you-
for this
Yes, when
panel.
you-
I
when you-
understand.
When you've talked about the confusion, I think you've summed it up.
Yes,
That
yes,
is a period
yes,
of
yes,
confusion.
yes.
That
That's
is
why
a
I'm
period
telling
of
that.
confusion.
I'm not discussing on that panelist, my gap. What is the gap in this session? Okay, thank you.
My question is to Shonali. You made a statement which I found a little confusing. That slow down, because we are moving too fast in all aspects of schooling with the children. And one of the things you asked us to slow down on is even granting of opportunities. That too many opportunities can cause a negative aspect. You need to slow down on. Now, my experience is that we have a diverse student body. We have to ensure that each and every child is able to get self-confidence and to get that feeling of being somebody. He or she needs to discover one activity which he or she does where the peer group recognizes the person, and you get that self-esteem from that. And that then helps you improve in all other aspects of your school life. Therefore, I feel that the maximum opportunity will lead to the kind of experiences that eventually is education.
Yeah, I think the principle of ensuring diversity and opportunity is fine. And if that principle is because you are acknowledging diversity in your student community and you're ensuring everybody has something to pick on, that's fine. But I think it's problematic when you have all the opportunity coming to the student and you have no space for thinking about it or to reflect about it. So one of the things that I find in the calendar of a lot of schools is that after the vote of thanks, the event is over. Whether it is an art competition or whether it is a science exhibition, the event is over. There's no unpacking of that experience. What I'm asking for is a hand-holding and thinking through of that experience, whatever the experience is. And, you know, a number of one is also fine. If only one child attended rock climbing, we still need to have one teacher sit with that child and unpack it. So I'm basically saying when I say slow down is I think you can knock off some things in terms of bringing in more speakers, bringing in more events, and replace that with time to think. That's what I'm asking for.
Yeah, hi. One question, yeah. My question is with Annie ma'am. But before that, I would like to acknowledge that I'm very happy today that I came here and all were giving really nuggets of wisdom. They were all super. All the points I have noted down, and these were super things. One thing I would like to ask you particularly, because you are still in the chair of principal and focusing over there. I run an enterprise called EdMonks, which is a social enterprise. I'm trying to work out the ways how the education is changing and how it will be changing in the coming future. As a school leader, how do you decide, or what kind of measures do you take when you want to address the points which are coming? Like the technologies are changing abruptly, like many technologies like blockchain or the 3D printing or artificial intelligence and many such things. Now before that it was like only like electricity came or computers came. So it was one thing at a time and people were able to handle it. But now all of a sudden it's a blitzkrieg. Second, like the need of skills also is changing abruptly. Like World Economic Forum talks about, list of, critical thinking, creative, complex problem solving, and many other things. So it's like a time where you really need to work with a lot of things at one time. How a principal address those things to manage? Thank you.
Well, I think your answer really lies in the quotations that were put up by Gideon, okay? That is, we think things are changing and the child needs, something else. But really, from time immemorial, the child has largely developmentally required certain things, okay? So as a teacher, I would say what is developmentally appropriate for the child at that particular age has to be considered. I really feel that all this digital stuff that is there, kids acquire it. As a school, we don't have to break our brains about, giving them chances to do that. I think parents give them the phone and the tab early enough, and you really have to work. For me, and I said also that the teacher has to have a certain understanding of the child and the child's needs, age-appropriate manner. And consequently, I feel that emotional sustenance, that kind of understanding, that kind of relationship building that is so crucial for a child as he's growing, contributes also to the society. As I said, a teacher has to be thinking of a society that he wants. So developmentally, the stuff that you're talking about is really not necessary for school life. This is the way I look at it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.